You ain't heard of shit like that. Working all night, you know shit like that.
Now in terms of the performance here for benchmarking, on Battlefield 4 on 1080p, with everything turned up, he averaged 65 FPS, and it was funny because in the background on our Xbox One, we had Battlefield booted up and it looked horrible in comparison to the great graphics and the FPS on his PC now. As for BioShock Infinite, we got around 52 FPS, which is pretty good, a little bit under 60, but again, for this price point, that's to be expected. On the newly released Doom, he averaged 47 frames, and as we saw more action in the scenes, it kind of dipped around 35, but for what it is, again, we'll take those numbers. And then playing GTA 5, we got 94 frames per second, 1080p on everything at the normal settings. Obviously with it all turned up through everything very high, we were getting under 30 frames, but that's alright because even at normal, at 94 frames per second, it still looks just as good, if not better than what he has on Xbox One, and we are getting nearly triple the frames on this PC. Very happy with that. And then in terms of benchmarking Firestrike version 1.1, we got a score of 4,604, which might not seem like the greatest thing in the world, but when you factor in the price and you look at the gaming PC for, VR at a score of around 9,000, you are getting double the performance for more than twice the price of what we spent to build this. So you are getting what you pay for, and as you can see, it is better than a gaming laptop of 2013, which is around when our components came to the market in 2013. So we are getting above that for around or under $500. And it does say you're better than 25% of all results, and that number is probably going to continue to drop with the new line of GTX 1080 and 1070 graphics cards. It's going to make other benchmarks better, but in comparison, we spent less on this PC than a brand new GTX 1080. So when you factor it all together, I think we're more than happy with what we
Starting off with Metro Last Light, we saw an average of 46 frames per second on high settings at 1920 by 1080. Though the game's PC exclusivity makes it tough to compare these results to those of a console, the fact that this is one of the more graphically demanding games of its time already cues us into the system's potential. At 1080 we were able to crank the settings all the way up to Ultra in BioShock Infinite and still get a solid 79 frames per second. Interestingly enough, the third installment of the IP never launched on current-gen consoles, making its debut only on the PS3 and Xbox 360. Both platforms ran the game natively at 720 at 30 frames per second. While it'd certainly be unfair to compare the performance of a modern-day PC to that of a 10-year-old console, it's also relevant to note that even the slightly faster PS4 is still running AAA titles at 1080 60 frames per second at medium to low quality. GTA 5 is the first game in our tests that's been released on all three major platforms. Running at 1080 and 30 frames per second on the PS4, we were able to hit 46 frames per second on average at the same resolution with a nice blend of quality settings. Since these results were much lower than I anticipated, I decided to pop the R9 280 into my X99 system, fire up GTA 5 with the same settings, and marveled at the performance gain to 74 frames per second, indicating a sizable CPU bottleneck for our Athlon CPU. There was an unexpected silver lining, however. Since the console overkiller wasn't maxing out the card's potential, I was able to turn the resolution up to 2560 by 1440 with no performance loss. The higher resolution made the game look super crispy while compensating for the lack of any anti-aliasing. Overall, a bittersweet discovery in my testing, to say the least. Since competitive first-person shooters generally favor higher frame rates, the PS4 sacrifices some pixels to meet that 60 FPS standard. However, the console overkiller blows it out of the water, scoring 82 frames per second on high settings. Seeing as how we landed way beyond the 60 FPS mark, I was curious to see how we'd fare at 1440, and much to our delight, the testing demonstrated a smooth gaming experience at 57 FPS. And finally, the last game I ran was Evolve, where we saw huge gains over the PS4 at 51 frames per second. At high settings, textures in the environment are pretty to look at, and character models still retain plenty of detail, offering up fluid gameplay all the while.
GTA 5, and you'll see we're easily capable of running on very high settings at 1080p with a solid 60 FPS. This is a great example of getting better than console graphics and a rock solid frame rate. Moving on to a title which has been a staple of my testing for a while, we have Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. Here again, we're easily able to play on ultra settings at 1080p at well over 60 frames. This is a title you could probably bump up to 1440p and still be fine. Getting into a DirectX 12 game, we have Ashes of the Singularity. This is a much more demanding title that especially taxes the CPU, but even here we're able to play on extreme settings at 1080p with around 38 FPS.